This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of Monday, October 28th, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I hope you had the opportunity to listen to last week's podcast. Chris Gahl, Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Visit Indy, unpacked the strategy for promoting Indianapolis to a worldwide audience during Taylor Swift's Eras Tour this weekend. And as promised, we have a follow-up interview with Chris this week that is so different from last week's that I thought we needed to carve out a separate space for it. I've interviewed Chris several times over my last 15 years at IBJ, and he's something of a public figure as he represents the agency in charge of marketing Indianapolis for conventions, entertainment events, and other tourism. I did not know much about him beyond that, other than he loves visiting Hawaii. It tends to come up in conversation. He has such a sunny disposition in public and such an easy way of expressing enthusiasm for almost any topic. I assumed he was from Hawaii. He is not. He grew up in Pike Township here in Indianapolis. And he had a pretty typical childhood until the age of 8 when his father was murdered. Thomas E. Gahl was a U.S. probation officer for the Southern District of Indiana, and he was killed in 1986 by a parolee in Fountain Square. It, of course, was catastrophic for Chris Gahl, his mother, and his younger brother, Nick. Even today, he's sorting through the repercussions of the loss of his father. The tragedy helps explain why Gahl has spent nearly 2 decades representing Indianapolis for Visit Indy. The tragedy reverberated in a different way in 2018 when Gahl was diagnosed with cancer. A father of 2 boys himself, Chris couldn't help but see the potential for his sons to suffer a similar loss. Under the care of a bona fide legend in the Indianapolis medical community, he got a clean bill of health just last year, and he very generously agreed to talk about the lessons from his cancer journey and his father's death when we met last week. Here's the conversation. Just curious, were you on vacation last week like half of the city is due to how schools now schedule their fall breaks?
Proudly took a break last week with my wife, Catherine, and our 2 sons, Kanoa and Kai, and we went back to Hawaii, back to the island of Oahu where we used to live and work and have family, and I did. I got away and unplugged. Felt great.
When you travel, is your work brain still taking note of what the visitor experience is like? And like maybe, hey, there's something here that we could do better?
Absolutely. Probably annoyingly to my family, because it's interesting to see what the guest experience is. And that's the focus, right? Is how are you welcomed into a place, even like an airline? How are you welcomed to an airport? How are you welcomed through an Uber or renting a car? How are you welcomed by a VRBO host? Into a restaurant? What do you pick up on? What do you leave with? And it's just fascinating to me how cities and brands put emphasis and expertise behind welcoming people into places and spaces.
Is Indianapolis comparable with Hawaii?
So I used to live in Hawaii. I used to help drive Hawaii tourism, and everyone would say, well, there's no competition. There absolutely, when you're in Hawaii tourism, there's absolutely competition. Fiji, Samoa, Tahiti, even the Hawaiian Islands compete with each other. And so had to learn about how to distinguish your island and your state amidst other competitors. Indianapolis is no different. We compete differently for conventions and meetings, and we're not tropical, yet compete viciously for these conventions and major sporting events. And so you have to pick up on the nuances of how cities like San Antonio or Austin or Nashville or Chicago or Dallas or Orlando welcome visitors and how many cranes they have in the sky and how things are improving.
That's a good thing.
That is.
Cranes is good.
Cranes, enough cranes, not too many cranes, but enough cranes dotting the skyline is healthy. And we feel like we're at a very sweet spot here in Indy right now.
So you grew up in Indianapolis.
I did.
In Pike Township.
Pike Township. Proud Pike graduate.
Where did you go to elementary school?
Guyan Creek Elementary, then Guyan Creek Middle, then Pike High School.
Are they still there?
They are still there. Grew up at 38th and Kessler, which was on the near northwest side on the edge of Washington Township and Pike Township, and proud Red Devil, class of 96.
Were you a sports kid Or had we not transitioned yet to the culture where 8-year-olds play 3 different sports?
Big sports fan. My dad was my first baseball coach. Played baseball and basketball and soccer, played all the sports.
At the same time?
At the same time. Back when you could do that and kind of fit it in. Seems like that's harder and harder. I know that through experience with our sons. Big Colts fan. Our family has had season tickets since 1988. Attended my first Pacers game with my dad in 1985. Grew up in and around Butler's campus, going to see football games and basketball games. And so I could hear the Indy 500 cars from my backyard based on where we lived. And so sports runs in the Gahl family veins. It's an important part of who we are and how we celebrate life.
And you have a younger brother?
Yeah, I have one younger brother, my brother Nick. He's an environmental attorney. He's 4 years younger than me. He's my best friend. He is the smartest person I know. He's someone I go to when I need help, when I don't understand something, when I'm in trouble, when I need a voice. He and my wife. He's just so kind and smart, and I lean on him on all aspects of my life.
Is he still in the central Indiana area?
Yes, he's in Zionsville. He and his wife own Gahl Legal Group. He does environmental law, and she does family law, and they've had their practice for many years, and they're at a place where they travel and practice law and do it exceptionally well.
So your dad was a U.S. probation officer.
Yes.
And he was killed in 1986 in the line of duty.
That's right.
By a parolee with a long history of mental illness.
Yeah.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 8. My brother was 4. Our dad was, the first and only federal probation officer killed in the line of duty. To have a family member murdered so suddenly is something still impacts me, and I unpack daily. This gentleman, my dad had only met one time. He was in and out of jail the majority of his life. He was schizophrenic and was supposed to be taking medicine. And my dad called on him on a Monday morning in September of 1986 at his home in Fountain Square. And he was there to help him, try to get him rehabilitated, try to help him find a job. And he had a shotgun, and he killed my dad instantly in the line of duty. And then he fled. He ended up killing a few other people. And because my dad was a federal officer and killed in the line of duty, the gentleman, Michael Wayne Jackson, was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and he eluded the FBI and authorities for about 10 days. He went and fled into Missouri. They finally tracked him, and he used his last shotgun shell to take his own life. But it was very traumatic, is very traumatic. And sometimes when I'm in need, I drive by the federal building downtown almost every day on my commute to work.
Is it the Milton Capehart building? Is that
it's the,
they still call it that?
The federal building, I don't know the...
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got the wrong building.
Maybe it's the Birch Bayh. It's the federal building right north of the Salesforce Tower, the limestone building. And I pass by it every day, and I know exactly where his office was. And I know that inside of that building, the U.S. Federal Probation Office is named in his honor. And sometimes I need to wander in, and there's pictures of him and plaques, and I'll just step in to kind of regather myself. And it's interesting to see our sons, now a senior in high school and a sophomore in high school, ask about him and ask about who he was and where he went to college. And even my wife, of course, didn't know him. And now at 46, the loss of a parent at any age impacts you and shapes you. And I still have a hard time going to Fountain Square, candidly. It's a place that kind of gives me anxiety because this is where it happened. And I know Fountain Square has come a long way, and it's a neat place. And it's also hard, candidly.
I don't know really anybody who's lost a parent, especially that way. But I'm assuming that is a really hard time for a boy to lose his father.
Yeah, when you're 8, you have so much uncertainty and yet so much to learn. And I'm so fortunate that God stepped up, my mom stepped up, my uncle stepped up, my grandpa stepped up and just said, let us love on you and take care of you. And I view my uncles as dads, and that's where you learn to tie a tie and how to drive. And my mom is the most faith-filled person I know, and she's a rabid Colts fan. And she bought season tickets knowing after my dad died and went to heaven, she said, you know what, Christopher and Nicholas, Chris and Nick, I think your dad would have wanted to have Colts tickets. I'm going to buy 3 season tickets. Now she has 2, and my brother have 2 right behind her. She's in the first row in section 118. She does not miss a game. And it's that type of outing that I enjoy going with my mom to Colts games. And that was part of the grieving process, is doing things like that what you would do with your dad.
Was that the first season?
1986, the Colts arrived. Excuse me, 1984, the Colts arrived.
Yeah.
1986, my dad died. 1988, we got tickets.
Got it.
And so we've had tickets since. And I treasure those moments with my mom and my brother.
How do you process something like that at such a young age and learn to like live with the grief?
I'm a man of faith. I rely heavily on giving that over. It's such a catastrophic, odd, violent way to have a parent stripped from you. I've had different levels of exposure through my life to wrestle with this event, this sudden event, this violent event. It's shaped me in ways I'm still understanding. Candidly, have some level of OCD that's been unpacked that's attributed to this experience in my life. And I've had to share that with my sons on some of my quirkiness and some of my mental health anxieties and how that's driven back to this moment in which I was told that my dad was murdered. And that's at age 8, a big moment. So I've come a long way with family and faith and still have a lot of unpacking to do. But I've become more comfortable talking about anxiety and mental health and the OCD tendencies that play out in my day-to-day life that I know are attributed to this moment that I know I need to keep working through.
Is that the role doesn't need me to play amateur psychologist, but I would assume it's a control issue.
It is. It's a control because everything went out of control in a moment. And so you have to try to put things in organized, controlled buckets so that you have some semblance of control in your life. You're exactly right. And I knew that from a young age. My mom knew that. And, you just work at it. But I've opened up with family and friends in recent years, and I had one of the most meaningful conversations. And I don't mind mentioning this because he's talked openly about mental health, and that's John Green. He's a big mental health proponent, and found myself opening up to him on some of my OCD and where it comes from. And of course, he has Turtles All the Way Down, which is a phenomenal book and movie. And there's a character who struggles with some OCD, and I felt myself opening up to him, and he had some great counsel. And it's just reassuring to know others fight this, and that I know where it came from.
Because you had a younger brother, did you feel like you had to parent your younger brother?
Absolutely. And I've apologized in more recent years to Nick, my brother, not because he asked or my mom asked, but it felt like that weight in that moment, 4 years older, maybe I need to be more father-esque or dad-esque. And there were moments where that was the case, and there were moments where, just like brothers, you bicker. I think 4 years, it was an age difference enough where we could have kind of a true big brother, little brother relationship. What I love is that page has been turned, and I see him probably more as a big brother than he does and as a confidant. But yeah, that was something I definitely carried and felt through high school and have been conscious about, and has shaped me in ways that I want our kids, my sons, to emulate.
In some cases, my sons also feel like they need to take care of their moms. But
Yeah.
It sounds like your mom was really your rock in that situation.
She's a breast cancer survivor as well. What she's gone through with faith, with family, with friends, she's just rock solid and uber smart and funny and fun to be with, and the kind of person that people gravitate to. She's a servant leader. She's dedicated her life to helping others, and she's just always shown up for others. And as a family nucleus, that's been incredibly helpful. And I protect her viciously. I tell my sons, I want you to unconditionally love and viciously protect your mom, my wife. That's my expectation. And I think sons do that inherently and have to be reminded that that's part of the job.
Did you take a year off academically at some point? Because it looks like you were almost 15 when you started at Pike.
Let's see.
Or am I just reading your LinkedIn page wrong?
I must have typed it in wrong. I didn't take a year off. I got to correct that. Did it say I graduated in 96?
You might have said 92, 96.
Okay. Yeah. No, I graduated in 96 and went straight to Butler.
Yeah. And that was interesting. Why did you go to Butler?
I reflect back. I think I grew up in and around the campus. I think there are 3 reasons why I went to Butler. Number 1, I grew up in and around the campus and felt comfortable. 2 is I wanted to study broadcast journalism and communications, and they have an excellent program. And I had a friend at Pike High School who went on to study there, and I loved his path. He was slightly older. And then 3rd, I think, innately yearn to be close to my mom and brother. And so I was 5 minutes away. And so for Butler, for me, just felt like home and could be emotionally as far away as I needed it to be, yet could have the comforts of home. And so I love my Butler experience.
Did you live at school?
I did. Lived on campus, yeah.
Okay.
Met my wife there, and I'm a proud trustee. It's a place that I believe in and believe has a lot of similarities with Indy. Kind of this underdog competing on the national scale, and stage, and the research and the pharmaceutical piece and the business school and the liberal arts piece is set against the city like Indy. It was an underdog in a lot of settings and arenas. We might, as a city, be most known for Indy 500, yet in Butler for men's basketball, but there's so much more when you peel back the layers to our city and to the university. So I'm a big Bulldog fan.
Were you ever interested in the programming at Christian Theological Seminary?
I would go by there and thought about it, never applied, never stepped in. It was always interesting to me. Had family friends who went through the program and benefited from the program. And I would always admire the architecture and art of the CTS building,
beautiful, yeah.
Which is now the College of Education there at Butler University.
I've also heard that there's something potentially liberating about losing a parent, in that you realize that the worst thing has happened. And I don't know if that resonates at all with you, but in a sense, it opens you up to not worrying so much.
Yes and no. I think no matter how old you are in losing a parent, it's difficult. And what it does is give you perspective. To your point, Mason, that the low is so low to have my dad murdered suddenly and violently. The perspective it's given me in terms of what is important and non-important, and how to love your family and friends because you don't know, and how every day is a blessing, not a cliche. That perspective is incredibly valuable when you go out to set out on your life, and how you instill values and morals, and how you invest your unrenewable resource of time and resource. The only other time in my life where I felt that instinctually is cancer diagnosis in 2018, when someone calls and says, you have cancer. Much like losing a parent, immediately what is laser focused is what is important to you. And everything else falls away. Your email falls away. Your phone falls away. Friends fall away. Things that you thought were important and payments to credit cards fall away. It is singularly focused on what is important and who you want to be around. And so in losing a parent, you give clarity on that. And being diagnosed, you get clarity in what is important. And I wish I had that same feeling every morning when I wake up, because it helps you prioritize life.
Yeah, and let me get back to that in a couple of minutes, but I did want to talk about what you did after college. It looks like you immediately went to Hawaii.
I did. So my wife and I meet. We have family in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. My mom used to live there. I grew up visiting Hawaii. My wife and I moved after college, after getting married, and moved to Honolulu. There are 8 major Hawaiian islands, and my wife got a master's in Spanish literature at the University of Hawaii. And she's 18 years as a Spanish teacher, now a vice principal up in Carmel at one of the 3 middle schools. And I was part owner of an agency that helped Hawaii tourism. And so that's when I really, growing up, and I was interested in tourism. Like, why am I a tourist when I visit? Who visits Hawaii? It's a long way to get there. It's presumably expensive.
Take me back real quick, though. So you graduate. So did you go to Hawaii because, we have family there and it'll be fun to be there and we'll figure out what we want to do? Or did you already know what you were going to do?
Growing up, my love for Hawaii and visiting Hawaii and learning about it.
Okay, so you've been there before.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
I had the benefit of visiting Hawaii and learning about and seeing the culture and the people in a real up-close, personal way growing up. Throughout Butler, I had flirted with the idea of relocating, and as graduation appeared and my girlfriend turned into a fiance, into my wife, and we visited, it was calling us and compelling to us, and a great way to start our marriage. And again, having roots there and having people there you could trust, and having the familiarity of a place, not just to visit, but to really live and dig in, was made it an easier choice. And the harder choice was moving back, because we had such established roots and connection and connectivity, and made that tough decision not to raise a family on the most remote landmass in the world, but to come back to Indiana.
When you were there, you co-founded a company?
Yeah, it was already founded. I was co-owner of a marketing firm. I was at an ad agency, then headhunted away to another marketing ad agency, and eventually became part owner of this firm. And much of our work focused on driving tourism to the island of Oahu, to Honolulu, to Waikiki, to Pearl Harbor, to explore that island. And through that, I gained even more tourism experience on how you market the Hawaiian Islands to visitors. And that was a continuation of my love and interest for the field of tourism.
So you come back to Indiana with the intention to raise your family. Did you immediately then get on with Visit Indy?
We moved back. I carried on in a backpack. We had everything shipped. I had 2 surfboards under the airplane. My wife had a job teaching Spanish at Noblesville High School. We lived at my mom's house in the bedroom I grew up in, and I was depressed. I sold my part of the business. I was no longer around the ocean and yet closer to family. And for 6 months, I kind of stewed, and my wife kept prodding, and I kept thinking and worrying and praying. And one day in the fall, 2005, I saw a position at then the Indianapolis Convention and Visitors Association. It was the tourism agency, and so I applied. In 5 weeks and 5 interviews later, I was given the job at Indy Tourism, and I was elated to stay in tourism and be able to market and sell the city I grew up in, and to stay in an industry I'm passionate about. And so 19 years later, here I am.
What was the job that you took?
Media Relations Manager.
Okay.
My job in 2005 was to place as many positive stories as possible in the following types of media. This is 2005. Black and brown related publications, so Hispanic and African American related publications to drive travel to Indianapolis, LGBTQ+, and convention and meeting trade-related journals. Those were the 3 areas that I was deployed to drum up publicity for. And if you think about 2005, we had just passed a human rights ordinance protecting for all genders and all sexual orientation here at the city level. And the idea was, let's be welcoming to all. So we did that. We marketed Indianapolis as a place to visit. We were gaining and growing in the makeup of our city in terms of demographics, and we wanted more Black and brown conventions and meetings and events and tourists. And so we were aggressive in going out and promoting Indianapolis. So I'm very proud that that's how I started, was in that way in 2005.
Fairly quickly, you became vice president of marketing and communications.
Yeah, within about 5 years, ascended into the VP role and helped build the team and attract the team and keep the team. And it's now as executive vice president, it's been challenging and fun to focus on culture within our walls and the marketing of our city outside of our walls. And 19 years later, I still feel compelled to advocate for this city and beat out other cities and become even more competitive. And it's fun to see how the team has evolved and how the city's evolved and changed.
I'm guessing that, especially in the convention and tourism industry, that there's a fair amount of like hopping around. How rare is it that somebody would have this kind of position for nearly 20 years?
Many of my counterparts have hopped 1 or 2 cities. They've moved from Nashville to Detroit to LA to run a convention and visitor bureau, or certainly the chief marketing officer, chief sales officer. Those move within our industry pretty frequently. And although those opportunities have presented themselves, there's something about Indy and the ascension we've made and the work we still have to do and being considered an underdog that I love. And I love walking. Our offices are inside the convention center. I love it when the building is full, and I love it when it's empty, and how conventions we booked 5 or 6 years ago are now meeting. And I remember that pitch or that bid, and now it's happening. And I love to see how our city comes alive and the importance of visitors and how others greet our visitors and engage with our visitors. And that's important work, and it keeps people working in our hospitality industry.
The reason why I'm still in Indianapolis is because of my family. I mean, my brother and my folks are still here. I doubt that we would leave because of my family.
Yeah.
Did also play a role. I mean, your brother, your mom, still here.
Being able to see them weekly and interact with my niece and nephew, and being closer to my in-laws who are in Illinois, back to that, what's important? Family. And so to have the closeness and build the rapport and have my kids know their grandmothers, that's what's important. And so Indy offers us that as well. And that's what's important.
Let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast in my interview with Chris Gahl about the life events and values that have shaped one of the most important voices that promotes Indianapolis. So my understanding is last year, and you alluded to this a second ago, you celebrated a 5-year anniversary. Tell us about that anniversary.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. Had a pain in 2018 and acted upon it. And turned out to be testicular cancer, and was fortunate to have Dr. Scott Pike, my urologist, help me. And then I had 2 people who helped me get in touch with Dr. Larry Einhorn, Jim Morris, who has since passed, and Judge Sarah Evans Barker. Both advocated and helped me get in to see Dr. Larry Einhorn. And I've been very appreciative of them and him and the role he's played in helping me now, 5 years later, be clinically free and have my oncology stopped for testicular cancer.
And I'll just remind folks real quick about Larry Einhorn, who practices at IU Health. He is a bona fide legend in the field of cancer treatment. I mean, he's like a quarter of a notch below Jonas Salk, really, in the field of medicine. He revolutionized the use of chemotherapy for testicular cancer and helped improve the survival rate, which was about 10%, I believe, in 1970-ish, leading up to 1970, to better than 90% today, which is incredible.
And he's celebrating his 50th year of service, and he's still going. And I've never felt so loved so quickly about meeting another human being. Again, nothing else mattered. He was just present, reassuring, data-driven on how to be cared for, and an Indy resident. And it's interesting, I was sharing with you beforehand, when seeing him over the 5 years, inevitably there would be a doctor in tow from somewhere else in the world, not a visitor per se, someone else in the world who would be shadowing Dr. Larry Einhorn because he is the world's leading oncologist in this space and many others. And it's fascinating to me that he's of that level in Indy, and people need his teaching, and we're so fortunate to have him.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention Lance Armstrong. He was the doctor who treated Lance Armstrong, who I believe was stage 3. He had metastases in several parts of his body.
First time I met with Dr. Einhorn, we were meeting, and he moved his hand, and his shirt sleeve showed a yellow band. This was 2018. And he saw me glancing at it, and he said, "Forever a patient." And I thought, good for him. Lance Armstrong had been through some other battles, and yet he was still having his Live Strong bracelet on.
And in the full interest of disclosure, or the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to butt in real quick on your story and say, I also had testicular cancer, and I also had Dr. Einhorn as an oncologist, and this may or may not end up being relevant to the conversation. So you felt the pain, and in my experience, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing, because it's, and I'm sorry you went through that. And yeah, the pain is, in my case, it was a little obvious and became more obvious. And, I went to go see my urologist, and guys aren't great about going to the doctor.
Yeah. I'm sure that Dr. Einhorn comes across that a lot.
Yeah. And so my urologist said, you know what, let's do an ultrasound, and got that call. And 2 days later, 48 hours later, I was in surgery, and a week later, I was in front of Dr. Einhorn, and 5 years later, cleared. And I wonder, your time when someone calls and says you have cancer, that's a hard meeting. That's a hard call.
Yeah.
Did you have that perspective that became clear?
That, well, number one, I was phenomenally lucky. I don't know if this is similar to your experience. I had this dull pain that just showed up out of nowhere. But it was just obvious.
Yeah.
And, tried to go a couple of days.
Yeah.
'Cause at first I thought it was gas.
Yeah.
And then I was living in Chicago at the time. I lived within walking distance of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and saw a great urologist there. And he examined me, and probably within about 5 seconds, he was like, "Oh, I think we're going to need to schedule. We had a sonogram, and then we probably need to schedule the surgery now. But I mean, that was basically it. They had the orchiectomy, as they say. They excise the tumor, and then from there, there was no evidence of vascular invasion, as they say. I mean, the cancer cells, there was no evidence that cancer cells had left this exterior part of my body and had come into the main part of the body. And the doctor was like, for me, this is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You could get radiation treatment and, I'll hook you up with somebody. But, there are disadvantages to that. And, you could easily just do a wait and see. And as you know, you go through a lot of testing.
Yeah.
You get a lot of CT scans and you x-rays, and you drink a lot of barium shakes. And they try over the course of the next 5 years, trying to see if the cancer cells had taken root somewhere in your body. But that initial conversation, it's tough. And I did not have the added weight of having a family at the time. This was probably 15 years ago. So I was going to say, I mean, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so here you are, and you've got, an 11-year-old boy and a 13-year-old boy?
Yeah, two sons who I had to try to articulate cancer, what it meant, what treatment looked like. Is this going to impact our daily life? And looking back on it, I know both sons were scared, and that's hard to see as a parent, because you as a parent, you want to reassure. That's your job, reassure. And so that was difficult. And there's perspective given. And I would come home after seeing Dr. Einhorn and sitting in the hospital, and inevitably you have waiting time and you're waiting for scans and to see doctors, and you see people who are even sicker. And that's a point that gives you perspective.
Yeah, that's really one of the more terrifying things, is to be down in a treatment area just for cancer patients, and to see the people who are just in various stages of their lives.
Yeah. So all of a sudden your emails don't matter and your deadlines don't matter. And again, that's the perspective with my dad, with the cancer, with the treatment, is this constant reminder that this phone can wait and that email can wait and that project is not as important as your wife and kids. And it's a shame it takes that, but that's some of the perspective.
Now, was yours a stage 1 situation, or did you have something that was more advanced?
A little bit more advanced.
Okay.
And again, God and Dr. Einhorn and him knowing what to do and what order. And it's just so reassuring to have someone like him who has seen patients from all around the world. And it's interesting, through that, they asked me my family cancer history. It turns out my great-grandfather had testicular cancer and succumbed. And that was on my mom's side. And then my mom had breast cancer. And so you kind of start seeing the line. And then that's something to be mindful of. And we talk openly with our 2 sons, who are now a senior and sophomore in high school, of just be in tune with your body. And there are doctors there for a reason.
So did you need to have either radiation therapy or chemotherapy or both?
Some targeted radiation, and then the monitoring of the tumor markers to make sure, to your point, that the cancer cells weren't floating through my body and of a level that could cluster and find another tumor. And so it's interesting to see how you take blood tumor markers, and testicular cancer is very, as you know, distinct tumor markers. And if those continue to drop because your body's fighting it off and wrestling with it, and the majority of the clumps of cancer are gone, then you get to see those markers come down. And that's reassuring.
So that's a scarier situation than I had, because I mean, you were having the radiation therapy, which isn't fun. How long did you have it?
A couple of years.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Did you have to miss a lot of work at all?
Work was not impeded per se, and very flexible and very appreciative of the work family. And it was a bounce back.
Yeah. How did you feel during the
Pretty
treatments?
good. Pretty good. I mean, some days a little tired and some days a little down, kind of blue, but just kept thinking up and fighting. And then the pandemic hit, and that was weird. And although at that point the treatment's done, you still need to see your oncologist, you still need to get scans, you still need blood work, and you still need to be reassured that there are no more tumors growing inside of you. And you add on the complexity of the pandemic. So it's that was odd.
Did this experience give you a different perspective on Indianapolis?
It did. And it sounds really like tourism geeky, yet I was really impressed with how a hospital like IU welcomes someone with cancer, or any patient, but my path was cancer, and how they, from a pre-op to a post-op, from welcoming you, reassuring you, following up with you, the attention to detail and the care and the bedside manner. A hospital they were very welcoming and intentional. And then I got to see these visiting doctors towing behind Dr. Einhorn, which was interesting to me, and how long they stay and where they spend the night and how many hours they spend with him. I prodded with...
Were you interrogating the other doctors?
I would. Where'd you stay? Where'd you eat? I'd ask Dr. Einhorn, are there any conventions you can help influence? And he and I got to talking, and we don't know that Indy's big enough to host some of the conferences where he has some influence, but we're not giving up yet. And then it was fascinating. Inevitably, I would learn about other people who are seeing Dr. Einhorn who are not from here. They fly in and stay in our hotels. They're treated or see him. They spend a long weekend or 2 or 3 days during the week, and then they take off. And I've loved helping a few of them when in need with passes to the Children's Museum or checking out a Pacers or Colts game, and someone who's really down and out who's visiting from Florida or Massachusetts. And Dr. Einhorn's office will call and I'll, can I help? Please let me help that patient.
I never had to stay overnight at Simon Cancer Center, did you?
No.
My brother did, and it was awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I would hang out in this room because that's a nice place.
Hospitals compete.
Yeah, exactly.
Hospitals compete. Absolutely.
I don't know if you had this experience where you get the cancer diagnosis, which is, it's the C word, it's bad. Whenever you're going to talk to anybody about it, they're going to have trouble with that word. At the same time, Dr. Einhorn says, this is 95% survivable. But you do have to, at some point, have, a meeting with yourself about the potential for dying. I mean, it's just much more present at the time. And then how did you deal with that?
When the call came in, it's cancer, we need to remove it. And then the test results show, the level of cancer, and articulating that first to your loved ones is the hardest, because I think you see a reflection of being scared and they see it in you and you can't hide that. There's self-reflection on how you've conducted yourself, and it happens quickly. And again, that sharp focus comes into light and lasted for a long time. And I wish it would keep daily. And I think a meeting with yourself is just exactly how I felt was, hey, Chris, what is important? And why haven't you focused on this? Or why has that been a priority? And that perspective is achieved through someone calling to say you have cancer. It shouldn't be. As a society, we should, and it's hard to do. We're in this fast-paced, email-driven, meeting-driven, Zoom-driven, consumer product-driven, hiding behind phones society. And none of that matters in that moment. Doesn't matter. It's being with your family. It's loving on them. And so why should it take that scare to prioritize? And again, that's what I've tried to instill in our sons, is that emphasis.
Did you have an empathic response or an anticipatory empathic response with your boys because you were in a position at relatively the same age with your dad dying?
I did. There was some level of, I remember driving home. I was downtown in the convention center. I got the call, and driving home, I remember thinking, I don't want to die. I don't want my boys to go through the pain and suffering that I felt. And I remember that's just not a possibility. And I don't want them to ache or be scared. And that drive home reflected solely on that. And hitting the couch and telling them and welling up with emotion, I felt like my dad was sitting there with me and helping guide those words. So it was not lost on me, the age of my sons and me and my dad.
So you have one that's about ready to go to college?
Yeah, senior in high school. We're touring colleges. We just got back from Hawaii.
Oh my gosh.
We toured
for the vacation. Did you see a school?
Yeah, we saw the University of Hawaii.
Wow.
In Honolulu. It's 20,000 students. My wife had gone there for a master's. It's very approachable. We have friends and family who have come out of that school, and that's one of about 4 schools our son Kanoa will apply to by November 1st, and we'll see where it takes him. He's comfortable in Hawaii, as is our son Kai, and I would have encouraged him, and he's shown interest in Butler, IU, Purdue, and the University of Hawaii. We'll see.
So now you got the clear from Dr. Einhorn. What's next?
We're bracing for this next season of life, which is getting kids out the door, and we don't want them to leave. We're happy they will. But in the next 3 or 4 years, my wife, Catherine, who's 21, 22 years married, she's vice principal, and she would aspire to be principal of a building. Leonard Hoops is our CEO and our president. He's someone who empowers me and I learn from, and he mentors me, and he'll be the next couple of years thinking about his next season. And so Catherine and I often think about, wow, okay, both boys will leave the house and maybe we'll move up one rung on the ladder. And what will that feel like? And will we have enough time for each other? And I wonder about some of these cranes in the air and what role I might play, an elevated role I might play in filling them with visitors even more so than I do now. And it's fun to think about the future. And it's also sad to think about losing these two humans that we've put so much time, effort, and energy into.
Don't get me started. I'm lucky because mine's only 8.
Yeah. And if you look at your resume, nothing's more important than father, dad, right? That should be at the tip top. And I know it is for you. And it's this work-life balance I really focus on. And so what's next is, for me, is also continuing to challenge myself and my colleagues to hold me accountable and hold them accountable for work-life balance.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we should go home.
Okay.
Workday's over.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I love being with you. You're so easy to talk with and to, and I appreciate you sharing about your cancer scare and our commonality with Dr. Einhorn. And thanks for your time.
Well, right on. Let's just hope that's the end of it.
That's right.
And then long and happy lives.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. My thanks again to Chris Gahl. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few stories in this week's edition of the IBJ that I want to draw to your attention. First up, the leaders of White River State Park are finalizing design plans for a $65 million extension of the park across Washington Street to the former General Motors stamping plant site, where Elanco Animal Health is building a new headquarters. Kate Sharon gets the proposed lay of the land. Also in this week's issue, Susan Orr has the latest hiring outlook for Indy's technology sector. And Taylor Wooten details the final stretch of the Nickel Plate Trail expansion through Indianapolis' north side. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. I will say it's quite a bit easier to access all of the latest local business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original this content is. Just go to IBJ.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.